If you're that unhappy, you should leave.
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Just save up all your nickels and dimes. Let's see what you'll find into now.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Salty Seaman, where today we're going to talk about a landmark independent film that's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, talking about Kevin Smith's Clerks. Now if you've not seen this movie, shame on you, you should go see it. You can find it anywhere. But if you have seen it, which is probably why you clicked on this video, you know it is a landmark film in terms of storytelling, dialogue, all the things it brought to the modern masses that really weren't seen in a lot of movies. Now it never got the full credit I think it ever truly deserved in terms of changing dialogue in modern movies, which I think it did a lot. It wasn't really the first one. Kevin Smith himself talks about Slacker was what motivated him to go shoot his own movie. He was very passionate about filmmaking, and he went through a lot to get this movie done, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the making of Clerks and some of the little stuff maybe you didn't know about Clerks, because a lot of it gets bandied about in terms of, the budget and the difficulties in making it, because it was completely independent. He was doing it on his own, but some of it has been lost to the myths of folklore over the years. Some is true, some has just never really came out on a big scale, because when you read press clippings about it and whatnot, they usually cherry pick the really cool stuff, or they get some of it wrong. But now luckily we have Kevin Smith, who does a billion podcasts, and he talks about the making of it here and there. And he's put a lot of little fun facts. That's probably where I got most of this, is just from gleaning from what I've heard from his various podcasts. So here we go, a list of Clerks trivia, folklore, facts, truths, and half-truths, celebrating the 20th anniversary. Clerks factoid number 1. The movie was shot for $27,000, and Kevin Smith hawked his comic book collection to fund it. This is a half-truth. It did cost $27,000. In fact, he did hawk his comic book collection, but the comic book collection was actually a very small drop in the bucket. If you're a collector of comic books, you know anything about comic book shops, you can't just go plop down your giant collection of comics and some comic book shop is just going to give you thousands of dollars because you have all these rare issues of Spawn #1. What really happens is they'll judge your comic book collection and offer you something for it. It's usually never what you really thought it was worth. My friend Tim used to work in a comic book store in St. Louis, and he got those calls all the time. People who were speculators in the 90s that had these giant collections, they usually weren't worth shit, and there's no market for it. Even in the 90s, unless you had something really rare, Silver Age, Golden Age, a few first appearances of characters became major later. The collection really wasn't worth much. His collection, he still had quite an amazing collection, but at the same time, the store was not going to give him thousands upon thousands of dollars. What they gave him was store credit. And you may be asking yourself, well, how the hell do you pay for a movie with store credit? Well, the answer is you don't. What really happened was he sold the store credit for, I think, about 20 cents on the dollar to his friend Walt Flanagan, who you see throughout Clerks and later in the later movies. He's the one that says, "Tell him Steve Dave." And of course, he's now on Comic Book Man. He runs Kevin's shop in New Jersey. But that's where he got some of the money, and it really was a drop in the bucket. Where he actually got most of the money was from credit cards. And they usually do mention this in the articles, but they aren't really making a big deal out of it. They kind of mention it offhand because the comic book collection thing is more exciting to talk about in an article. But the story about the credit cards is actually fairly interesting in itself, in that he had about 10 credit cards with about a $2,000 limit each that he maxed out. That's about most of where the film comes from. It's about $20,000 But where does a guy working at a convenience store, which if you didn't know, Kevin did work in Clerks, he did work as a clerk at Quikstop RST Video, where would he get the credit line to get all these credit cards? Well, the simple fact is he fudged his application forms. He inflated his annual salary as calling himself a manager, and if they ever called to question it, he was the guy that answered the phone, so he could always say, yes, it's true, he makes X amount of dollars. So he got all these credit cards, and he maxed them out to pay for the actors, pay for the equipment. That was a big cost, because this is everyone has a digital. You have a $500 decent video camera like I do. You can kind of shoot a movie if you want. Back then you had to have a real camera, a real with real film in it, and it costs money, and buy them were insanely expensive. To rent them still costs a lot of money, and the editing software and all the other little costs that go in. And that's what adds up to $27,000. Rest of the money came from he got a loan from a family member. Him and Jason Mewes, got insurance money on a car that got ruined in the flood that happened in Jersey. So it's a fun story. Everyone likes to tell it, but in truth, it's only partially true, and it only gets bandied about because it's an interesting little tidbit. But in reality, the comic book collection wasn't a big part of making the movie. I know the factoid of the movie: all the people in the movie are Kevin Smith's friends who did him a favor to act in his movie. Now you watch this, and a lot of the acting's pretty amateurish, so it seems pretty reasonable. And you obviously know some of the people were friends of Kevin, but it's not totally true. It's about a half-truth. Think of the principal cast of 6 actors. Both girlfriends were, in fact, actresses. Dante Hicks, Brian O'Hallahan was an actor, and the rest were Kevin plus 2 of his friends. Randall Graves is played by Jeff Anderson, who was a friend who he asked to do the role. Jason Mewes was basically playing himself. He wrote the role for him, and he ended up playing Silent Bob. But everyone else was a local actor that auditioned, got paid, the whole thing. Now you look at the rest of the cast, it's the same thing. It's about a mix of half and half. Some of them are friends and family playing bit roles. His mother is the milkmaid. His sister is the elephant masturbator. Producer Scott Mosier is various roles, including he is infamously Snowball. He's also the guy on the roof, sans beard, who ends up in a hockey game with Dante. And various other people. And a lot of the other ones are actually actors, the random people that show up in the stores. So, again, a half-truth. You know, it was a real movie. It was really done like a real movie should, despite being really small and independent and on their own budget. So it wasn't a home video, as some people might want to say. Tying into that, another factoid: everyone in Clerks is based on someone Kevin knew. Mostly true. You could call this one a fact. The roles of Dante and Randall are based on Kevin Smith himself and his friend Brian Johnston, another person you might know from Comic Book Man. He's the big burly guy with a giant beard. If you watch that show and ever heard his little quips and one-liners, it's very obvious that if someone told you that's what Randall's based on, you could believe it because he sounds just like it. Dante is more based on a side of Kevin, just his more dour, down on himself, whiny, complainy side. If you ever listen to Kevin on his podcast or where else, you know he's a lot more than that. He's very funny, very quick-witted, likes to laugh, and so those two kind of came from him. In fact, he probably wrote a lot of himself into Randall besides what came from Brian, as he originally wrote that role for himself. He wanted to be in the movie. He realized this part was out of his range as an actor, so he went and got his friend Jeff Anderson. The other people in the movie, you have the 2 girlfriends again, Veronica and Caitlin. Obviously, probably based on various girlfriends Kevin had. Probably not exact translations. You know, just an amalgam of different relationships he's had. So pretty much, Jay, like I said before, based on Jason Mewes. Jason Mewes was playing himself, or at least he was at least playing someone. He was at least playing himself as he was earlier in his life. Now, one of the things about that's funny he always brings up is Jason didn't recognize the dialogue he had been written for him, even though Kevin had based it off things that Jay used to say when he was a younger teen. So an older, like about 18, Jason Mewes is like, "Who the fuck says Snoochie Boochies?" A line they later basically when they later parody that in Chasing Amy. But it's true. The big exception of the main characters is Silent Bob. Not based on anyone in particular. He's more just an archetype of the strong silent type. But bonus little factoid: he didn't write it for himself. He had written Silent Bob all along, but hadn't intended to play him. Said he originally intended to play Randall. But the person that was supposed to play Silent Bob never showed up for rehearsal, so Kevin was acting as a stand-in essentially for Jason's roles, and then he just ended up saying, well, if I'm not playing Randall and I want to be in my own movie, which may be my only movie, then sure, I'll just end up playing Silent Bob, and of course, look what that turned into. So a smart move on his part. Another Clerks factoid. the movie was almost not picked up. In fact, it was in its 11th hour before Kevin would have had to have gone back to being a clerk and spending the rest of his life paying off his credit card debt. True. The movie was accepted into various film festivals after he completed it. A lot of people saw it and liked it, but there wasn't a lot of people biting to get it distributed, released, what have you. It was looking pretty bleak by the end. Another little fun fact is that Harvey Weinstein, the head of Miramax, who ended up eventually getting it, actually walked out on it the first time. Kevin's gone into this. If you've ever seen Clerks, if you're a big fan like me, you enjoy the opening scene as much as the rest because you've seen the movie so many times and you know the characters, and it's fun watching Dante come out of the closet, is watching him make his breakfast, and it's all building up to him having this really shitty day. He's not supposed to be there, right? But if you watch it for the first time, you go back with blank eyes, you'll see that it's not a really strong opening. It's kind of slow, and something he definitely got better with his script writing, but it really doesn't pick up into the real super hilarity till the blowjob conversation we get with Dante and Veronica later in the movie, about 15-20 minutes into the movie. That's where the real Clerks picks up. That's where people really start to like the movie. If you're a longtime fan like me, you like all of it because you've seen it so many times. But Harvey didn't get it. He walked out within 10 minutes. It was actually a film critic who I believe worked for the Village Voice or somebody in New York, I believe, called Harvey and was a big fan of the movie and convinced him to go give it another try at another festival. He finally did go see it all the way through, loved it, and of course it got picked up. Now the other little bit about whether Kevin would have ever been, whether Kevin would have never had a career in Hollywood if that hadn't happened, is speculative. I think we can all agree that we'll never know the true answer unless we invent a machine that can get us to a parallel dimension. Barring that, we can just speculate on what we've seen. It got picked up into these film festivals. If it had not been picked up into a film festival, that probably would have told him, you're not cut out. You're like, you suck so bad you can't get in an independent film festival. He probably would have gave up and never tried again. The fact that it was picked up, I think would have, even if bolstered him to keep going, even if he'd never decided to do another full film, he would have gone into writing. Enough people saw this movie that were in the biz. These film festivals are crawling with people, producers, and what have you, that are always looking for the stuff like this in the back of their mind. Like, hey, give me the guy that wrote that funny movie with the Clerks talking about blowjobs. I want to get that guy to punch up my new teen comedy. He would have. I almost think that would have happened. He would have gotten work at some point, probably as a screenwriter, script punch-up guy, something. I mean, obviously he wasn't going to get picked up for his cinematic ability because he didn't really have any. Brings us to another factoid. Kevin Smith dropped out of film school. This is true. Kevin Smith only completed half of film school in Toronto. He basically got what he wanted out of the school, which was a lot of the technical aspects. And, you can make the jokes. He probably should have stayed the rest of the time and learned the rest of them, because definitely his early movies is pointing a camera at people and letting them talk. But in reality, he wanted enough ability to tell what he wanted to tell and left. And he was also a little homesick. So yes, Kevin Smith did not complete film school, but it did allow him to meet Scott Mosier, who'd go on to be his silent partner until the podcast. He was the guy behind the scenes. Like I said, he was Snowball. He's a hockey guy on the roof. He plays roles in most of his early movies. And he met him at film school, and they hit it off. They have a bond. He doesn't get a lot of credit, or at least not originally. It's all everyone focuses on Kevin, not the other guy who's also doing a lot of heavy lifting for these things. But recent years he has a podcast with him called Snodcast. It's Kevin Smith, Scott Mosier, SM. And you hear Scott is just as funny as Kevin, really. He's a more dry sense of wit, but he's an incredibly funny guy. You can see why Kevin formed a bond with him, and you kind of wonder why he doesn't do more stuff like that. He's kind of broken off from Kevin career-wise and doing his own producing stuff now, but so he still does the podcast About Weekly with Kevin, and they seem to just have a really great time. So, Toronto Film Festival thing, true. Should he stayed longer? I guess that depends on how you think of his filmmaking ability, but I think he's got along just fine, and it paid off in the end with Scott Mosier. Another Clerks factoid. The soundtrack cost 3 times what the movie cost. This is true. The movie was shot, as we said, for $27,000, which is minuscule for a movie budget of any recent era. Even 1993 when it was shot, that still is ridiculous by nowadays standards. I guess going with digital technology and stuff, maybe not too weird for an indie movie, but still, it's really small. You think back then, definitely because it was all the equipment you got to get, paying the actors and all the set locations, which he didn't have to do obviously because he was shooting at his work and his boss had let him shoot at night. So he got that out of the way, but he still had to pay for all the equipment, he still had to pay for the crew, he still had to pay for processing the film and the editing equipment, and all that stuff still cost him money. But it was only $27,000 a drop. That's what you pay the PA to do lunch runs on a lot of big budget movies. So not so much. But when it got picked up by Miramax, they put a real soundtrack on it with real big name artists. Kind of give it that good, that soundtrack we all love. There's still a lot of indie guys on there, but there's Soul Asylum and Alice in Chains, and those people cost money. And so, yes, the budget for the soundtrack was about 3 times what the actual movie cost. It still all made up for it, just in a short theatrical run. It made a couple mil, which, of course, was way more than the movie was barely over $100,000 even with the soundtrack in. So, it's still a great success if you look at it percentage-wise. And of course, its later life on DVD, Blu-ray, VHS, even Laserdisc. The movie's, it's got to be one of the most successful percentage-wise versus the budget of about any movie you can think of, and definitely its longevity in terms of what it's spawned. The rest of the Scootiverse, the New Jersey trilogy, Fiveology, whatever you want to call it now, the cartoon, and just to continue everything about that movie and what it created. I think it definitely, it's a fun fact, but it's still made up all its money back, so pretty cool, huh? Another Clerks factoid. Brian Johnston, who we already talked about, who's Randall's based on, who we see in Comic Book Man, listen to the podcast, Tell Him Steve Dave. I was meant to have a part of the movie, some kind of, he wasn't in an acting role, he would have been doing something in production, something helping Kevin. But he didn't. And that's true. The reason being, Kevin and Brian were in the middle of a friend's spat at the time. So they weren't talking, and they were both still working at the video stores actually, but they just kind of ignoring each other. So this movie he'd planned all along to do with his friend, who he based one of his characters on, ended up not having anything to do with the movie. In fact, the movie was how they, patched up their differences at the time. When he finished it, Kevin extended the olive branch to Brian to come over and watch it and ask his opinion on it. And I kind of patched it up. And obviously, he's in the second movie in the comic book store, and he shows up later on. And of course, now he's in Comic Book Man. So yeah, it's one of those weird things. So yeah, there you go. Brian Johnston should have been more of a bigger part of Clerks. Might have been something completely else in the Scootiverse, but timing just didn't work out for him. Another fun Clerks factoid. Kevin Smith did not sleep during the making of this movie. Pretty much true. By all accounts, he was working at the store during the day, and he was shooting the film at night. Which means, and then he has to get up and go work at the store again in the day, which basically means he's not sleeping. So, I mean, I think it's obvious in some scenes. He'll point them out too if you ever want to listen to a podcast. Go find some of his podcasts, listen to the DVD commentary. By the end of the shoot, he was falling asleep on the set. Like, he literally was, he was just passing out from exhaustion because he hadn't slept almost any for weeks, which is just not healthy. And he said they were shooting at night, which brings another fun factoid. Probably know this, but if you don't, the reason that the gum is locked in the shutter was established at the beginning of the movie is because they were shooting at night and they didn't want to have the window be dark through the front of the Quikstop for no reason. There should be sunlight. It's supposed to be in the middle of the day, so they came up with the idea. We'll have some savages came and jammed gum in the locks. They can't get a locksmith out, so the shutter's gonna be down. And then they made the funny, but it created necessity is the mother of invention, they say sometimes. And it's true because they think of the whole scene where he makes a big banner with a shoe polish, and everyone's running joke about why he smelled like shoe polish. All came from necessity. They had to have the blinds down, so they wouldn't show that the outside was just as dark as the inside. Tying into this, they did shoot some in the daytime for various reasons, but it was a very small budget. Kevin didn't have a filter for it to put on windows, so there's a scene with Randall. I think it's when he's talking to he's reading off all the porn titles in front of the mother and the child, and you can see outside his window. Or it's during it's a daytime shot, but he didn't have a filter because if you know anything about cameras work, it focuses on one light source, so that's focusing on the inside light source. So the much brighter light source, which is the outside, is blowing up. It's like really bright, and big name movies, big budget movies or any kind of budget, they'll have some kind of filter to make that not so bad, but they didn't have it, and he really couldn't film around it. So if you go watch the movie again, when he's reading off the porn titles, it looks like nuclear winter outside, as Kevin says on the commentary track. So, little things like that kind of add to the movie. Which brings us into another factoid. The movie was not shot in black and white for artistic reasons, it was shot for budgetary reasons. Again, true, mostly true. But yeah, it's pretty much true. This is the day of film. This is the day of you had to shoot on a film camera and you had to process said film. Quite simply, black and white film is cheaper to buy and it's cheaper to develop. And a lot of indie movies, especially back then, did shoot on black and white. Artistically, yes, it's kind of a cool thing. For this movie, it works, especially because it kind of gives it a security cam footage feel to it, which I think works. Being set in a convenience store, you almost feel like you're watching the security cam footage of a convenience store. So the black and white definitely worked, but it wasn't done for that reason. It worked out that way, but in reality, it was a financial choice. Of course, nowadays everything's digital. You really have no reason to shoot in black and white now unless you just want to do it because everything's color. But even back then, even in the 90s, where you think like, hey, everything's been in color since the 60s, for movie making purposes, it still was a consideration how much you want to spend. Color does play into it. Alright, that will wrap it up for my factoids, truths, half-truths, folklore about the making of the legendary independent movie Clerks. If you like this video, you like the other videos I have on here, maybe give me a little like on the like button, hit the subscribe button. I got all sorts of geeky stuff coming up. Go back and look at some other videos. I review Gotham, I review mixed martial arts, I talk about all sorts of stuff. I'll probably have some comic book stuff coming up here real soon. Before I talk about the new Deadpool movie coming out. Talk about some more movie stuff. I can talk more Kevin Smith stuff. It's all keep coming. I'll do 2-3 videos a week. Keep it locked right here on the Salty Seaman. And I'm outie. Peace!